Welcome to this new automotive news video for Monday, April 20th, 2026. And to kick off this week of automotive news, we're going to talk about Mercedes, which is finally unveiling its new electric C-Class. I'll be sharing lots of new information about it with you. There is some good news, but there is also some bad news. We'll talk about Citroën, which is announcing a new version of its electric C3, a more affordable entry-level version, but with a really small range. And we'll talk about the European Commission, which is about to approve another rollback regarding the end of combustion engines in 2035. These are the topics of this first video of the week. I hope you'll find them interesting. If so, please show your support by liking, subscribing for future videos, and clicking boost if available. It's really the best way to support my channel for free and give me a bit more visibility. And by leaving a comment where you share your opinion about today's news. And we're going to start with the big topic of the day, since Mercedes has just unveiled its very first 100% electric C-Class. So don't worry if you're a fan of combustion engines. Mercedes will continue to sell its combustion engine C-Class, whether it's hybrid or not, for many more years. And we also know that the current combustion engine C-Class should get a new update and a facelift around 2026. So it's far from over. Still, the Mercedes C-Class will now come in a fully electric version. No, you're not imagining things or seeing things wrong. This electric C-Class is indeed much bigger and much larger than the current combustion engine C-Class. In reality, these dimensions are very close to those of the E-Class, which is actually the large sedan in the lineup, measuring 4.88 meters long. It's 13 centimeters longer than the current C-Class, and it's almost the same length as an E-Class. In fact, the wheelbase of 2.96 meters is the same as that of an E-Class, and its width, almost 1.90 meters, is also totally comparable to that of an E-Class. This isn't a surprise because it's something you find across all lineups of all modern brands. Cars are larger and heavier now compared to 15 years ago, and the same goes for competitors. The E3 in 2025 is almost as big as a 5 Series from the early 2000s. On the outside, it follows the design cues of the latest Mercedes GLC, with a large grille whose outline can be illuminated by an LED strip, front and rear lights featuring a light signature inspired by the Mercedes logo, and a large black strip framing the rear lights. Inside as well, quite a few elements are taken from the GLC. So, on the entry-level versions, you can expect a 10-inch instrument cluster display, a 14-inch central screen for infotainment, and an optional 14-inch passenger screen as well. Whereas on the high-end versions, you'll find the same hyperscreen as on the latest generation of the Mercedes EQS. It's a kind of giant screen that spans the entire cabin, over 39 inches, which is used both to display the vehicle's instrumentation and all of its infotainment. As standard, it comes with a fully panoramic roof. And as an option, you can get the Sky Control, which is an electronic panoramic roof that can switch almost instantly from transparent to opaque. Technically, there are still major differences from the current Mercedes GLC. You should know that the GLC, even in its 100% electric version, is based on a multi-powertrain platform, whereas this model is built on a platform that is 100% dedicated to electric vehicles. It's the MB.EA platform, which benefits from an 800-volt architecture. At launch, it will only be offered in the 404-matic version, a four-wheel drive version with one motor in the front and one in the rear, producing 489 horsepower, allowing this giant to go from 0 to 100 in just 4.1 seconds. I'm talking about a giant here, because even though Mercedes hasn't released the weight of this new electric C-Class, there's a very good chance it weighs well over 2 tons. When it comes to battery, range, and charging time, and this is probably where we get to some of the bad news, this electric C-Class will come with a 94.5 kilowatt battery that, on paper, offers 760 kilometer range. So that's not bad, but in reality, it's a bit less impressive than the fully electric CLA, which is supposed to be the brand's entry-level model and actually claims 20 kilometer more. And even though that's still good compared to the average of other modern electric cars, compared to the competition from other brands, it's not that great either. Its direct competitor, the i3 from BMW, claims almost 900 kilometers of range. We know that matters for this type of car because it's designed more for highway and long trips than city driving. And the i3 claims a higher charging speed, 400 kWh compared to 330 for the C-Class. So, obviously, everything will depend on the price. If the C-Class is cheaper than the i3, maybe it will be interesting for Mercedes. For now, we don't know its official price, but we can guess it won't be cheap, especially because the CLA in the 354-matic version, which should technically be in the range below the C404-matic, is sold for 63,000 euros. So there's a good chance that the fully electric C-Class will be above that, probably above 66,000 euros for the entry-level model. Whereas on the BMW side, we're talking about an entry-level price for the i3 that's under 60,000 euros. Everything will depend on the pricing position of the C-Class, It's hard to see how it could be below the CLA range while still being cheaper than the i3. And it's also hard to see what technological arguments it could put forward against an i3, which for now offers more in terms of range and charging speed. By the way, since we're talking about range and charging speed, maybe that will help us put into perspective the slightly lower range of the C-Class we just mentioned. At Citroën, they just announced this weekend a new version of the Citroën C3 Electric, a cheaper version. But keep in mind, we're talking about something cheaper that still costs 19,000 euros. But still, it's true that this new version of the Citroën C3 Electric is actually the cheapest in the lineup. And it also becomes one of the cheapest electric cars on the French market, with a listed price, once the incentive is deducted, of 12,900 euros. It's cheaper than the latest generation Renault Twingo Electric, but on paper, it's also worse and even less versatile. Because we're talking here about a C3 Electric with a very small 30 kilowatt battery with a range of 213 km WLTP. That's really not much, and with this kind of car, long trips very quickly become nightmares because on the highway, it's probably actually less than 100 kilometers in real-world driving. With this car, you can forget about long trips. Plus, fast charging isn't actually very fast. We're talking about 30 kilodalers here, which means that if you're driving on the highway at 130 km/h with this car, for every hour of driving, you'll have to spend about an hour charging your car. And by the way, just a quick note about the range of this car, it's actually 213 km WLTP. 304 km in the city, numbers that have never been verified by most journalists who have tested this car. Most tests report city consumption of 15 to 18 kilowatts per 100 kilometer, which means that even in the city, there's a very good chance that the total range will be less than 200 kilometers. Still, if you're absolutely looking to switch to an electric car and you only do short trips, this car is probably more interesting on paper than the electric Twingo in terms of budget. By the way, since we're talking about Stellantis, let me quickly mention some news about them. Just a quick side note, today, Peugeot has revised the stated power of its SUVs on paper. For example, the 3008 or the 5008 in the plug-in hybrid versions go from 195 horsepower to 225. However, their performance remains exactly the same, as well as their engines. There is no new engine, not even an update to the current engine. What's happening is that Peugeot is simply one of the first European brands to implement a new power calculation protocol, the GTR-21 protocol, which will be mandatory for all manufacturers starting in 2027, with the arrival of the Euro 7 standard, and which requires them to now display the actual power of their plug-in hybrid vehicles. Because until now, most manufacturers, when talking about plug-in hybrid vehicles, only mention the combined power, meaning they would add the electric power and the engine power. For example, 100 horsepower on one side, 100 horsepower on the other, they would simply add them together and that would give the final power. For instance here, 200 horsepower in my example. However, it's more complex in reality. And with the new calculation protocol, manufacturers must now show a value reflecting the true capabilities of the electric motors and combustion engines when used together. So don't be surprised if, in the coming months, a whole bunch of manufacturers announce increases or decreases in power on vehicles that are actually exactly the same with the same performance. To finish, I wanted to quickly talk to you about the European Commission, which is getting ready to take another step back on ending combustion engines in 2035. Stéphane Séjourné, Vice President of the European Commission, was interviewed this morning and hinted that, even though for now there was no question of changing the 2035 targets, which had already been lowered at the end of 2025, with, for example, the possibility for manufacturers to continue selling combustion engine models under certain conditions. Nevertheless, a series of new measures were planned to smooth out, or at least facilitate the path for manufacturers, allowing them to reach these targets. If you watched my videos this weekend, this may sound like a news story I mentioned Saturday. I told you the German government wanted the European Commission to approve new measures. There were two in particular that we talked about in that video. First, that certain synthetic fuels would be recognized as carbon neutral, and second, that manufacturers would no longer need to use decarbonized steel to offset combustion engine car sales after 2035. And guess what? That's exactly what Stéphane Séjourné means. He notes that low-carbon European steel is currently non-existent or available only in tiny amounts, so requiring European manufacturers to use it to offset combustion engine sales isn't feasible yet. At the same time, without naming them, he acknowledges that now certain synthetic fuels or biofuels are officially recognized by the European Commission as being carbon neutral, which means that some vehicles that will be exclusively designed to run on these fuels, even if they are combustion engine vehicles with very large engines, will be able to continue being sold without compensation. After 2035, So it's still changing, and we'll probably know more in the coming weeks since I remind you that a vote is scheduled to take place sometime in June 2026 on the future of these measures. To be continued. Anyway, that's it for today's little news updates. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, I count on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for the next videos, and maybe even supporting the channel by clicking the join button. We'll see each other again tomorrow for the next one. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.